What's your homeowners association horror story? Our neighborhood HOA tried to make us remove the ivy from our house. After combing through the bylaws, there was nothing stating we couldn't have ivy. I put my foot down hard and told them if they made me remove my beloved ivy, then I would put 50 pink flamingos in my yard because there was no rule about it. They left us alone after that. This made me smile. For my 16th birthday, my family flocked the yard with 16 lawn flamingos, all wearing party hats, in the snow, in February. As someone who works in the law enforcement industry, any HOA complaint that involves someone doing something that's against the HOA rules, but not actually breaking any legal statute. Oh, you don't allow homeowners to park in front of their house, only in their driveway? If it's not posted by the city or state, then it isn't a no parking zone and anyone can park there as long as they aren't blocking a driveway and are parked within 12 inches of the curb. We get harassed constantly for parking in front of our own house. Someone usually comes by on a golf cart and takes a picture, then mails us a photo of the violation with a threatening letter. The rush of power these people must feel. SMH. In former neighborhood, HOA board wanted to replace the fence that surrounded the entire neighborhood, just the perimeter fence, so that the neighborhood would look nice to the outside. Of course, 2 board members' houses also sat on the perimeter, so their fences would have been upgraded, which is fine. The cost was only a couple $100 per household, one-time fee, but to pass the fee they held a meeting in a little 20-person local library room. Hundreds of community members flooded in to demand an explanation or at least hear it out. One community member had done some research. For HOA bylaws, they were supposed to have obtained 3 quotes. They only got 1. The same member also dug a little further and found out that the quote had come from a brother-in-law of one of the HOA board members. Very sketchy. So the community demanded 2 more quotes, which both came in at about half of what the brother-in-law's contracting service had quoted. An educated consumer is powerful. Right now there's huge battle over how red mulch can be. Glad to see some people are using their time wisely. Co-worker lived in a very expensive and very high monthly HOA neighborhood. They were born in the Netherlands and had a Dutch flag sticker on their front window, maybe 3 inches tall. They got a $75 fine in the mail. Her dad read the rules over extremely well, went out and photographed over 75 US flags, went to the head officer and said he wouldn't be writing a $75 check until the person writes up all 75 of the following addresses, as there's no exception for an American flag. They dismissed his fine. Rule: not allowed to be obviously foreign. A guy with the name Bill Champion rose the ranks of the local board for a few years, became the president, and suddenly skipped town one night. Left his place empty without telling anyone he was leaving. Months later there was a large deficit in funds discovered that was fudged on the books. So all of the homeowners who had been paying into this large fund that is supposed to be there when roofs and fences need replacement were bamboozled by this guy with a, now, clearly fake name. He probably does this as a long con across the country, while profiting off of other shady dealings as well. I'm inspired TBH. Got a letter from our association telling us they were going to fine us because our dog caused turf damage in our yard. One of the bylaws was that you had to register your pets with the association. We didn't own a dog and they knew it. I told them to take their fine and shove it. The $50 we had to pay the association for a PDF of the bylaws when we sold the place was also ridiculous. I will never live in a community with a HOA again. They tried to fine me $3,000 for cutting the top 2 inches off my lawn and reseeding it. Problem was, I had written approval from them from weeks before for the project, and all of a sudden they were labeling my lawn a construction zone. You were constructing grass, I guess. That must be against the rules. When I was about 10, a new neighborhood went up across the street from us that had a HOA. The houses were very nice and were probably worth $200K more than the average house in my town. My parents had owned our house for about 15 years at that point, and man did my dad like to pee them off. One story that sticks out is when I was a freshman in high school, my dad bought a large windmill meant for power. It wasn't one of the big ones you see, but smaller in size, probably a good 20 or so feet tall. The HOA in the neighborhood tried to get him to take it down since they deemed it an eyesore. My dad pretty much told them to get lost since they couldn't do anything. They ended up trying to sue us and the judge dismissed the case after my dad explained that the windmill was approved by the city planning committee and he had permits and that we weren't a part of the HOA. He still has it up and decorates it with lights for Christmas. I bought a house in a HOA community and was a police officer at the time in a large agency. This meant I got a take-home car. So a police car was in my driveway whenever I wasn't at work, or it wasn't in for service. Well, the HOA was fine if it was in my driveway but not if it was in the street. I was sent several letters stating they would tow the car if it wasn't moved even though there was no rule stating no street park unless it was a commercial vehicle. I guess a cop car is a commercial vehicle in their mind. So I replied, go ahead and tow it. It's not my car and you can fight with the city about it. Well, the day came to tow it and the tow truck company, who just happened to be on the towing rotation list for the city, refused to tow it as they were worried it might get them in trouble with the city and tossed off the rotation list, costing them thousands. The letters stopped and from then on I only got dirty looks from the HOA board. We had our lot repaved over the course of a week or so and we required to park on the street while it happened. No biggie. Well, some guy late at night swerved to miss a cat with his Ford Expedition work truck and killed my Ford Fusion in the front, and pushed me enough to hop on the curb and backwards into my wife's car. My car was totaled, wife had to have repairs, and he went to jail for 2 months cause he ran. In the end, I got a new car, so it worked out. Fast forward 2 months after I get my new car, which was a first for me, I go to leave for work and as I walk down my steps and look in the lot, I don't see my new car. I usually park it in the same space, every time. I finally found my car, on the other side and not in a spot I would ever park in. I figured my wife moved it or something for a weird reason. Texted her and she said she didn't. I then find out that the HOA decided to just tow and move my car because they had to fix a part of the lot and my car was in the way. I also find out that they moved about 5 cars, without asking. What irritated me the most was, I was home when they did it. I never got a call, an email, a knock, nothing. They just decided to tow and move it. I went back to check on my car and would you guess what? The plastic parts under my bumpers were scratched from being dragged on the pavement and the towing rig. I know it's just plastic and people can't really see it, but this was my first new car. I'm 2 months owning it and I just wanted to take care of it and keep it nice looking. In the end I had the HOA pay for the parts, but not the work. To this day, I'm still mad. Genuinely surprised the HOA didn't charge you for the tow. Good for you though. Small victories. Mine was actually my parents and it luckily didn't last too long. I lived across the street from the neighborhood park and home was boring. No one in the neighborhood was my age so I'd just put my headphones in and get on the swing set and just get lost in the music. I was in middle school, didn't say a dang thing to anyone, didn't do anything but sit on a swing set for years. Well, one day a mom and her daughter moved into the neighborhood and she had a problem with the idea of a 13-year-old girl being in the same park as her daughter. She had a problem with it because apparently 13-year-olds had no business there and I should be forced to leave. Went to the HOA. They told her to frick off because I knew the guy. The guy knew me. They knew I was cool. B keeps spending the next few months harassing me every dang time I'm minding my own dang business on a swing set. B keeps telling me I have to go home or she's calling the cops. Eventually HOA got sick of it and had a meeting. Sat her down and told her to leave me alone. I wish she would have called the cops. They probably would have said a few things to her for harassing a minor. They want us to pay 2 years back pay, 2015 to 2016. We moved into that house in 2017. Make a claim on your title insurance. They are responsible if they did not disclose this ahead of time. Had a board member tell me that he will write people up personally for political signs if our site manager refused to do it. I sent him the exact law that forbids him from doing that. Word for word that he cannot do it. Plain as day. He still did it and the person he wrote up called me directly, asking what the frick was wrong with me. I told her it was closed out, destroyed from record, then called the board member with the attorney on the other line. The attorney literally told him to resign and move if he couldn't comprehend the massive lawsuit he very nearly got the HOA into. Source: Property Management Company. Happened to a neighbor. One of the water lines broke, so he wasn't getting water for his sprinklers. He contacted them to fix it, but they hemmed and hawed and dragged their feet. Then they mailed him a complaint about his lawn dying. My neighbor built a pergola in his backyard. It took him 2 weekends, but it seemed him and his son had a lot of fun. It looked great. He was incredibly skilled, and it was 100% cedar. So, the HOA sends him a note saying he has to take it down and ask for permission to put it up. He sent a letter to ask for permission. They denied it and said they wouldn't consider it unless he first took down the pergola. So, he took the whole thing down, disassembled the whole thing. Then, he sends in a letter to ask for permission. 2 months later, after review, they granted the request. Then he put the whole thing back up again. Similar thing happened to another neighbor, but he painted his garage. He had to paint his garage 3 times. HOAs, when buttholes, are a cross between the mob and Nazis. It is a super horrible intersectional evil. I live in a condo with my dad and stepmom. My car at the time was, admittedly, a beater. The back end was duct taped up pretty bad and it had a lot of bumper stickers. My parents have really nice and new Buicks, so my 90s Oldsmobile parked outside and they parked in the garage. I went on spring break with my sister and came back to my car in the garage. Apparently, the neighbors were selling their condo, and my car, in another driveway and having nothing to do with their property, lowered their property value. They complained to the condo association, and until I sold that car I wasn't allowed to park it in the driveway or on the street. Parking on the street isn't allowed here anyway. By the time I sold my car they still hadn't sold their condo. It wasn't my Oldsmobile, it was the ugly white carpet in the bathroom. Not awful, but definitely sucks. My house was painted blue and we had to choose a different color to repaint it. That color blue was not an approved color anymore, so that freaking sucked. In the state where I live, ages ago, HOA tried to force an elderly couple to give up their granddaughter who had been recently orphaned because the community was elders only. The kid wasn't a nuisance or anything. She was just a little girl who had lost her parents and the HOA decided her life was worth less than their peace. Please tell me they were told to frick off. We lived in a city with a military base. The HOA was composed of retired military officers. They treated the homeowners like general enlisted and expected us to follow their every edict without question. I once went to an HOA meeting, was one of the only people there. They immediately ended the public meeting and reconvened the meeting as private and kicked us out. We had to submit landscaping plans for approval. They had something like 4 months to approve them. Mine were returned after 4 months. Denied because I did not have enough lawn in the design. It was a native plant. Drought tolerant design. The landscaping specifications did not specify that any lawn was required. When I pointed this out, they never responded and never approved my plans. I did what I wanted but was always looking over my shoulder waiting for them to find me or order me to remove and redo my landscaping. They never did. Meetings about the HOA and bylaws need to be public. They can't make vote-based decisions in private. Current and former residents of an HOA. What's your I'll never live in an HOA again story? My old house's backyard bordered the HOA community. Our house was built 30 years before the community was built, so we weren't part of it. We used to get notices about violations and fines if we didn't correct them. Never did correct them. They finally sent legal papers to repossess our house. Went to court with a tax map that showed our property not part of the HOA community. Judge dismissed their suit against us and found them guilty of harassment. We didn't get awarded much, but I made sure to break every rule of theirs I could until we moved. This makes me happy that someone could actually stick it to a HOA. I usually like living in HOAs and the ones I've lived in have been decent, but my parents' HOA is insane. When my dad was diagnosed with cancer and began his chemo, he became too weak to walk. My parents installed a ramp at the front door so he could get his wheelchair into the house. Their neighbor, the HOA president, went crazy. She demanded doctor's notes, appointment slips, and that my dad proved to the neighborhood that he could walk and was lying. My dad was too weak to do anything and mom is too passive, so I had to step in. I threatened to lawyer up and sue her personally. She eventually backed down. My dad passed away in April and a week after, she came banging at our door saying she saw the funeral home come and pick my dad up and that we need to take the ramp down now that he's finally dead. Her exact words, At that point, I called the police right in front of her to report her for stalking and harassment. I moved in with my mom and now every time this woman sees me, she runs back into her house. On another note, she follows neighborhood kids home from school asking their names and where they live because she wants to know if they really live there, and my neighbors and I have caught her many a time looking into our backyards. If she's following kids anywhere, call the police immediately. I live in Florida and have the pleasure of living in a HOA neighborhood while not being a part of the HOA. Apparently there are a total of 3 houses in my neighborhood not part of the HOA, and I was fortunate enough to have bought one of them. Ever previous owner refused to sign into the HOA, and I have continued this tradition. Best part is getting all sorts of fines, letters, and people knocking on my door informing me of stupid trivial violation. I just get to laugh at them while I explain I'm not a member of their stupid little club and therefore not beholden to its rules. At one point they had my truck towed out of my driveway because of the HOA's no truck policy. I simply called the cops and reported it stolen. It was found at a local impound lot and returned to me free of charge. The HOA ended up having to pay for the tow impound fees and tried on several occasions to pass those on to me through fines. Finally had a lawyer write up a cease and desist letter telling them to leave me alone or I'll press charges for the theft of my truck and harassment. That was 6 months ago and I think they finally figured out they have no authority to tell me squat because I haven't heard from them since. We had a house fire that cost 2 children lives. 2 days after the fire we got notices that we need to do something about the debris because it was unsightly and we were a corner lot. I hope somebody got at least a black eye for that. There were 366 units spread out on over 200 plus acres of land. One of the residents got fined $1,250 for putting outdoor Christmas lights on 2 trees in front of their unit. Outdoor decorations being prohibited beyond residents' front door entryway. I honestly don't understand how some organizations can justify these kinds of rules. I love reading contracts and agreements, so when a friend of mine told me about his HOA troubles and not letting him keep his boat behind his house, I jumped on the opportunity. After reading, sourcing and finding a few rulings, I learned that they have very little power to enforce what they can't see from the road, which affects property value. He took my documentation to the HOA and requested that they remove his fines. They refused, saying the agreement says nag, and after a few months he finally paid a real estate lawyer $2,000 to go talk circles around the HOA and they finally backed down, removed his fines and allowed him to keep his boat. Then out of pure spite and with my design we built a 40 feet tall temporary structure, conforming to both the HOA agreement and building code, to fly a flag on a further 25 feet pole. We took it down and put it back up every 3 months for a year. You could see it from almost anywhere in the neighborhood. It was a real triumph and it was hideous. I was putting on new siding, very obviously too, had ladders up and everything, but there was just plywood up one morning on part of my house, facing the street. I got a knock on the door at 7:30 am. A code enforcement officer, in uniform, looking vaguely like a cop, was visibly upset and acting like I'd taken a dump on the front sidewalk or something. Told me if I didn't have the siding up by the end of the day I'd start getting fined every day. HOA lost paperwork for change of ownership when we bought our house. They sent us letters saying there would be a lien placed on our home if we didn't pay the overdue amounts plus over $200 of late fees. I had to call them 3 times to even get someone on the phone who knew how to help me. Then I contacted escrow, who said they had already not only sent all the paperwork, but turns out we had already paid the fees. Called HOA again and they were insistent that we hadn't paid or sent over paperwork. Called escrow again and requested they contact the HOA themselves to sort this out, and HOA still insisted we owed a late fee. Started losing my crap until escrow said they would pay the late fee. A month later we got a letter in the mail saying we were being fined for leaving our trash bins out longer than necessary. Frick HOA. God, I hate HOA. There should not be a reason that you could lose your house for not doing some arbitrary thing on your own dang property. My wife's aunt and uncle live in a HOA neighborhood. Their current problem is that the ground is higher than their first level and it's sloped towards a group of condos. Every time it rains bad, their condos flood. They don't have basements. HOA won't do anything and it seems a few of their residents are lawyering up. This has happened since they put in a storm drain and for some reason it backs up into their common area which is behind the group of condos. I'm being charged $400 because of a violation for a bush overhanging my walkway. I don't have a walkway or a bush. The picture isn't even my house. They won't back down. My family was fined for putting up a fence when we put a 12-inch tall wire border around our flower bed. My friend was fined in a different HOA because her garage, that was painted by the same company at the same time and with the same paint, was a different color than her house. It wasn't. The HOA president delivered the violation notice to her on the day of her husband's funeral. Yes, he knew that she, 46-year-old, had just lost her 48-year-old husband 4 days before. Okay, I officially have to quit reading this thread now. This made me just rage for your friend. I hope she smacked him in the nose. My grandparents lived in an old folks community with a zealous HOA. My grandmother had to go to the hospital cause of her mental health problems. My grandfather would go with her. This happened once when I was visiting. There was a knock on the door at about 10 AM. Two elderly women with clipboards immediately jump into a speech about how the trash cans hadn't been brought in. I explained the situation. One of them said she was in the hospital the previous week but still managed to bring in her trash can and handed me what looked like a ticket for $50. Frick, that crap. My daughter was a lifeguard at the pool in our community and they weren't allowed to give out certain equipment. It was for swimming lessons. One day the HOA president asks for equipment and my daughter says no as she was instructed. The HOA president actually says, "Do you know who I am?" Then he proceeded to call her boss. When I was a kid my parents had a house in a nice cul-de-sac, but it was a working class neighborhood. The transmission in my truck took a doo-doo so I replaced it in our driveway. A few days later we got a letter citing a clause stating all improvements done on property must be done by a licensed contractor. It was a far reach but they stood by it as there was nothing in the CC&Rs against working on personal vehicles. My dad made me pay him back for the fine but for a while afterwards I'd go put some oil or coolant under the HOA president's cars and hope he wasting money chasing a non-existent problem. That is brilliant revenge. I was just learning to drive and parked my car too far away from the curb. Parents and neighbors didn't get along so neighbors measured the distance from the wheels to the curb and parents got fined. Now I live in the country with pretty much no rules. We have goats and emus in our front yard. HOA lost my quarterly check. Sent a notice that I didn't pay an October quarter. Showed them the receipt from when I dropped it off. Then started naming each quarter before until I didn't have receipt proof they received it and then it was that is the one you didn't pay. Tried to charge an extra $5 for something. Sold the house and moved far away. Your cashed check is proof. Moved to Florida where every neighborhood is a HOA. Upon moving in I felt like I had joined a sorority or fraternity and I had to endure the hazing from the HOA. The final straw was when they sent me a letter that my white mailbox was dirty. So I decided to walk down one street and took pics of mailboxes with no doors and mailboxes that were covered in mildew and I emailed them all to the HOA. I told them to not send me any more notices until these mailboxes were up to code. I haven't received another notice in a year. I guess I passed my initiation. They'll bully you around until you hit them with a taste of reality and that you won't tolerate their bulls anymore. So, when I was a kid my mom moved to a townhouse complex, which had a strata council, which was basically a HOA. I often keep late hours, so I like to keep my windows blacked out so I can sleep in. So, I tinfoiled my windows, which were recessed basement windows. You could not see these windows without being on our property. She got a notice to remove them, because no window coverings are allowed unless they are white or beige. She passes this along to me. So, I take the tin foil down, put white paper over the windows, and then tin foil behind that. And to further improve things, I then add a layer of black construction paper. No light is getting through, and it's all white from the outside, which is allowed. They then drop off a note asking what time they can come by to inspect to make sure there's no tin foil on the inside of the window. My mom and I had a good laugh over this, and ignored the letter. They sent a follow-up, more demanding, angry letter. We ignored that too. Eventually they sent one threatening fines, and my mom sent one back that lied and said they had already inspected and they needed to figure their crap out. And then she got an apology and no further hassling on this issue, because the strata council was full of busybodies who hated each other, and no one wanted to admit that they were out of the loop. This didn't happen to me, but several years ago a co-worker told me about how she and her husband put in a small in-ground pool in their backyard. They got all of the required permits and everything and nobody said boo during the weeks of construction. After the pool was installed and they were getting ready to open it, the HOA sent them a letter informing them that it was in violation of the HOA rules and it had to be removed. I guess their community had a public pool at the clubhouse or something. They ended up going to court and spending thousands of dollars to fight it. In the end, they agreed to erect a high privacy fence around it so that it wouldn't be visible. How ridiculous. I've never lived in one, but I remember a story where a guy wanted to build something like an 8 featuring privacy fence. The HOA said the fence couldn't be higher than 5 featuring. The wording only said fence, so he built a 5-foot concrete partition and stuck a 5-foot fence on top of it. Malicious compliance is my favorite when it comes to HOAs. This sort of fits. I lived with my wife in officer housing on a military installation. Of course we had to follow certain rules so everything looked shipshape. That wasn't hard to do. What did get under my skin was the colonel driving around, taking notes, and then having her underlings issue tickets to residents for minor infractions. The one that sticks in my mind was the suckers, as they were called. I had never heard the term before. Although I kept my grass mowed per regulation, the little maple tree seeds would sprout up overnight and be an inch taller than the grass. I got a ticket for suckers in my lawn, even though the grass was freshly mowed. Okay, sure, I'll just mow the lawn every goddamn day. Sheesh. I never lived under an HOA, but that experience was enough for me to realize HOAs weren't my thing. They wanted me to switch the color of the light bulbs I used outside. Nah, I don't need someone who is that picky to have any power over my property. At that point, it's no better than renting. My former condo HOA threatened to take me to court over the color of a light bulb inside my condo. They said I'd altered the exterior appearance of the building since it could be seen through the window. My HOA president walks around the neighborhood every day and takes pictures of any violations he finds. There is a management company that does monthly checks for violations, but that's not enough for this old, bored, retired man. About a month after having a baby I got a knock on the door from the HOA president, which I answer in my post-surgical breastfeeding outfit, because a palm frond hadn't been trimmed after being down for 3 days. Then I got a written notice the next day. Then I got another notice 2 days later. The HOA maintains the roads and there's a 15 mph speed limit. People drive pretty slow. These idiots put in 3 speed bumps on a 200-foot stretch of road. I've never seen anyone blast through and I regularly go on walks. They also put up a security camera, raising our monthly dues, because one neighbor left their garage door open all day and someone took a few things. We clearly live in a dangerous area full of criminals. I can't sell yet, but when I do, never living in a HOA again. We rented a condo from the people who owned it and it was associated with a HOA. We like to grow things but there was no balcony so we just had 2 large pots, one on either side of our door. We got a notice one day that we had to get rid of our only plants because they didn't fit the aesthetic of the building, or something. Basically, they were too ugly. They also didn't have a room to discuss whatever it is they discuss at meetings, so they would do it in the gym for some reason. They'd move all of the equipment to the side and set up their tables and chairs and then never moved anything back. One time I accidentally barged in on them in my workout gear and I actually had the nerve to ask them if there was a boardroom I could work out in. I said it on my way out, so I don't know what their response was, but yeah, we didn't renew our lease there. Just go exercise in one of their home offices or their bedroom. I live in a neighborhood that has a $1 a month HOA because we have a shared drive with an area drain. That money goes to emptying the area drain every couple of years. The CC and ours are very laid back, there are no rules, so I, wrongfully, assumed that would be the experience living here. The HOA president, the guy who schedules the area drains being emptied, is a boomer on a power trip. He is in my business about everything. I got a new furnace and he threatened to sue me because the utility company had to use the driveway. I scheduled a specialty garbage pickup with my garbage company and he called me screaming that I put garbage out in front of my house that morning. I have a retaining wall in front of my house and he came by and yelled at me for cleaning it. The list goes on and on. Total nightmare experience, and I will never live somewhere with a HOA of any kind ever again. Had a member of the board drive up and yell at me while I was moving in because a moving van was in the street. Parked it in the driveway but it stuck out into the street about 2 feet. Woke up the next morning and there was a warning posted on the moving van for sticking out into the street. Welcome to the neighborhood. Ended up living next door to the biggest butthole in the neighborhood too. These were 0 lot line properties and he put an above ground pool in the side yard between our 2 houses. There's supposed to be 3 feet space along the side of the house for access, but his pool went from his wall to my wall so you couldn't even walk between the properties. Then every time they went swimming the pool walls would flex and bang my house. I wrote multiple letters to the HOA but they didn't do anything. Moved out shortly after the pool incident. I'll never live in another HOA. Should have called city code enforcement. Alternatively, cut the pool down your property line because he gifted it to you by leaving it there and you can't allow establishing adverse possession. My former HOA threatened to take me to court over the color of a light bulb inside of my condo. They claimed that the color of a bulb inside my unit altered the exterior appearance of the building. I'd had Philips Hue lights for probably over a year without issue. Then my neighbor left up their Christmas lights well past New Year's and received a complaint about it. Next thing I knew, someone complained about my Hue lights. I switched them to white. I could have won in court, but it wasn't worth angering a bunch of petty buttholes who have nothing better to do than to sit on a HOA board. Anyway, the association wanted to add a new amendment that allowed them to sue anyone over anything they deemed a nuisance. They brought in their lawyer for a question and answer session. I asked if the color of my neighbor's lights could be considered a nuisance. He clarified that it had to be a bigger concern. I followed up asking if we could claim that my neighbor had altered the exterior appearance of the building. He laughed and said no dismissively. So by that point their lawyer had already admitted their case was unwinnable, and he'd said earlier in the meeting a big part of his job was to keep the association from taking an unwinnable case to court. So the lights were whatever color I wanted them to be from then on. I now live in a neighborhood without a HOA. Sometimes a neighbor's grass is a bit high and another neighbor just built a patio in the front yard, and sometimes people put trash out a couple days before the city says they can and nobody says anything. It's wonderful. I'd just run them in fast rainbow RGB and remove all my curtains if that happened. I was doing some work in the yard and had a 5-gallon Home Depot bucket on my driveway. After about an hour I took the bucket back in the garage and went inside. A week later my HOA sent me a 3-page letter with a picture of said bucket on my driveway saying it detracted from the value of my neighbor's homes. It was on my driveway for an hour while I was working. Can't make this up, folks. We had a cookie cutter house built. One of the color palettes we could choose from included an accent color for the door shutters that was a dark purple. The hubs and I are a little kooky, so we selected it. At our final walkthrough, our door and shutters are brown. I tell the general that it's wrong and show him my contract. We were the only homeowners in the subdivision that selected that color, so the HOA decided to not offer it anymore. We said fine, that puts you in breach of contract and we want to be released. A few phone calls later, my door and shutters are purple and I'm happy. We purchased the house. At least once a year we got a nasty letter from the HOA about our unapproved door color. Every time I sent them a copy of my contract and their bylaws stating that the colors from the builder are allowed. Not my problem, you guys discontinued it after I picked it. It's just incredible to me that in this world there exist people who look at the colors of doors of other people's homes and keep a mental list of which colors are allowed and which are not, and are willing and able to levy fines against someone for having the wrong color of door. A week after moving in I received a letter from mine saying I was spotted not cleaning up after my dog in the common area. That was a blatant lie. Every single time he pooped there it was picked up. I didn't have roommates at the time, so there was no way it could have been someone else. The fine would be $100 fine after the first warning and $150 after that. I wrote back telling them I didn't appreciate being lied to and accused, and that was not a way to welcome me to the neighborhood. I went on to inform them that if it happens again and they provide no evidence to back their claims, they will be hearing from my lawyer for harassment. They would do that to everyone that moved in with a dog. They constantly made up special rules about parking depending on who it was for. Us couldn't park on the road at all. Others could. Brought that up to them and then called the president anytime I saw a car parked. He didn't like the constant calls. I started parking on the street, and when he said something, I told him to frick off and have the same rules for everyone or stfu. He stfu about it. They would complain about the backyard. That could only be seen if you purposely went out of your way to look. They said they had to keep the community looking beautiful. I asked why there's always trash not picked up and little liquor bottles everywhere. Why weren't they picked up on his beauty walks? No answer. I made it a point to pick out every little thing in his yard and called him to report him. He didn't like that. Told him to stop harassing me or I'm getting my lawyer because he is singling out this house and it's going to end now or he's going to be paying for the consequences. My HOA had a coup where half the board resigned on the spot, same day, and the 3 board members that were left handed management of our neighborhood over to some mega HOA corporation based out of LA. Before the handoff was complete, the chairman of the board fired everyone that worked for the HOA, including our incredibly talented accountant who due to his experience kept our finances so tip-top that we had a surplus of money and have never had our monthly dues raised in almost 15 years. When we, the residents, demanded an explanation, the chairman refused by quoting an article from our HOA charter which gives the board the explicit right to manage the community however they see fit and without needed approval from the residents. He basically told us I don't owe any of you an explanation, so suck it. Now we are trying to overturn his decision to essentially give our neighborhood over to some crappy HOA management group that treats its residents horribly like a crappy landlord would a tenant. Oh, and the management group that we were given to is run by a man whose only formal education is a degree in opera, and the accountant who has been assigned to manage my neighborhood's finances does not have a degree in finance or business. She has a degree in ballet. It is my opinion that our board was bribed into selling us to that management firm. Our community hired a lawyer and we are in the process of reversing what our board has done. If successful, we are going to rehire everyone they terminated and change the bylaws to prevent anyone from ever being able to do this again. So yeah, that's my worst story and it's still going on right now. So she can dance around the issues you bring up while he sings the praises of how great a job the HOA is doing. Sounds good to me. What is your worst experience with a homeowners association? My cousin is pretty well off and bought a nice house in a brand new neighborhood under the control of a HOA. Over the last 15 years, many shenanigans have occurred, but the absolute worst happened in November last year. The HOA illegally applied for, and received, credit cards for most of the homeowners in the neighborhood. They then use these cards to hire contractors for fixing outstanding issues in the neighborhood, like mending slightly damaged fences, washing windows, cleaning chalk off sidewalks, and replacing weathered spigots, all without the homeowner's knowledge or consent. They actually would verify that the homeowner was away from home before the contractors would show up. Then people started getting credit card statements for cards they had no knowledge of. The lawyers are still putting together their cases. The HOA at my parents' old condo decided to ban the use of parking spaces indefinitely. People assumed they were being repainted or something, but eventually it was discovered that the buttholes on the board thought the complex would look nicer if everyone parked on the road. But of course, the 2 parking lots next to the board member's house weren't closed. Changing the HOA rules was intentionally set up to be difficult. Meetings could only be held at 11 AM on workdays. All adult residents of a house had to be present or that house's vote input was invalid. Crap like that. In protest, people made sure the lots by the board members were constantly filled with cars so they would have to park on the road too. Eventually it culminated with the board illegally towing a bunch of cars. They wrote a new rule about how long cars could be parked in spaces and posted a notice on every door in the complex. The new rule was no car could be parked in the same spot for more than 48 hours, but they decided that the timer was retroactive, and on the very morning the rule was made immediately started towing any car that had been in a space for the previous 2 days. The condo complex where I grew up was composed almost entirely of low-income Mexican immigrants illegals, and low-income white trash M-heads. Half the cars towed were either custom lowriders or custom trucks jeeps. A bunch of the lorridas were damaged in the process of towing, and one of the jeeps straight up went missing, apparently stolen by or from the tow company. A tow company, incidentally, later found out to be owned by a board member's brother. I was just a kid and only got the full story much later in life, but all the members of the HOA board got the crap beaten out of them and had their cars stolen and intentionally wrecked. The way it was explained to me was that they were left on the board, but told their rule-making days were done. But hey, silver lining. The racial divide that used to split the complex in two basically disappeared after that. The Mexicans started inviting us to their giant picnics and the whites started inviting them to game night keggers. Apparently the secret to race relations is forming a biracial mob and beating people up. More HOA stories should end with a mob. HOA had roughly $150,000 in the bank with annual expenses of less than $40,000, which was fully covered by monthly dues. The first meeting I went to, the president introduced a motion to remove the requirement for the HOA to have an outside accountant audit the books annually. He claimed the $500 or so that it cost was an unnecessary waste. I freaked. This was pre-Archer, but I ranted something like, "Do you want embezzlement? Because this is how you embezzle money." I continued that I was very uncomfortable with the HOA holding so much money and I suggested we do something with it. Maybe build a playground on common property. I did not have kids at the time. The council said that was not possible because of liability if a kid gets hurt, and they have to save to someday replace sidewalks. Sidewalks were less than 5 years old at the time and in perfect condition. When I asked, they had no idea on costs to replace sidewalks. Had not even looked into it, but they were sure it was expensive. The crazy thing is that I actually got booed. The other attendees wanted to move past the boring budget stuff so they could rant about whose dog crap on their lawn. So I sat down and listened to about a half hour of dog poop detective work before I left. I never went to another meeting and moved about 18 months later. Maybe not a great story, but I thought it was pretty horrific. My favorite is our friend's house here in California, where there's a severe drought and a ban on lawn watering. Guess whose HOA insisted that people still water their lawns last summer, despite the city publicly saying they will fine anyone who does so. Water your lawn equals city fines you, as well as using up precious water. Don't water your lawn. HOA fines you. I read stories on this, an article about a couple that face fines from the city for watering their lawn during the drought. Then the HOA went after them for not upkeeping their lawn, i.e. it was dead from not watering. The ironic part was the city and HOA fines were the same amount. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. Our neighborhood HOA started out with well-meaning rules, but then they started adding things, like not having your garage door open without working in there, regulated the number and color of planters pots you could have, and even what kind of plants and height restrictions. You also got fined if your bushes everybody had the same ones, got over 3 feet high, and yes, some jackass actually walked around with a ruler and cited a good third of the neighborhood one day. Not worst so much as most entertaining. Our HOA these days doesn't do much beyond basic safety stuff, like keeping street signs upright and enforcing rules about curb appearance, no statuary or fountains, keep your grass trimmed, that sort of nonsense. And they're pretty tame about that. According to some of my neighbors, they were much more aggressive when the neighborhood was founded 40 years ago. Our neighborhood is split in half by a strip of forest, and right in the middle of this strip is a house owned by a guy I will call Jeff. Now Jeff was a manager at a local park, and a real Ron Swanson type. Jeff bought his strip of forest a few years before the subdivision was conceived, and thus Jeff is not subject to any of the HOA's rules and regulations. However, this was not going to stop the plucky young man who founded our homeowners association. No, he was determined that our neighborhood would follow certain standards, and Jeff was simply not living up to these standards. His yard was overgrown and crawling with local wildlife, and he kept a boat in his driveway. The nerve. Well, the president of the HOA was not having this. He arrived on Jeff's doorstep one day with a packet containing all of the standards the HOA expected its homeowners to live up to. These were such things as no window boxes, no front-facing vegetable gardens, blah blah blah. Jeff looked over the packet, calmly informed the president that he would make a note of the regulations, and shut the door in his face. The first thing that went up was a fence. Not a solid fence, mind you, but a board and rail fence. so that you could see what else Jeff was up to. This prompted the first of many letters from the HOA to Jeff. After he got that letter, he put up a vegetable garden, front and center. Another letter arrived, and Jeff started renting out space on his lawn for people to store RVs and boats. Another letter, and Jeff put up window boxes. I don't know exactly how long this went on, but eventually it escalated to the police. As soon as they found out that Jeff was the proper landowner, they laughed in the HOA's face. Then it escalated into a civil suit about property values or whatever, and the judge dismissed the case on similar grounds. Nowadays, Jeff is retired and putters around his house day in and day out, filling up hummingbird feeders, replacing light bulbs on the Christmas lights he keeps strung up 365 days a year, run off a huge solar panel planted in his front lawn, naturally, and just generally being an awesome old dude. And our HOA has basically been neutered by the whole ordeal, and hesitates to file a complaint against even the most egregious violations. I'm looking at you, family that clearly runs some sort of business out of their garage. Jeff sounds like one badass sob I'd like to have a beer with. I used to live in a neighborhood called Quiver Falls in Kansas. The HOA that managed it was run by a crooked president who, allegedly, stole millions of dollars and failed to provide required maintenance on people's homes because the HOA was broke. A couple members of the community finally sued, but before discovery could occur all the financial records for the HOA were lost. Also, the president ended up dying of cancer prior to trial, so there wasn't anything that could be done to recover the HOA dues. Aprix $200 a month for a few hundred units, paid by homeowners in the community. The situation got so bad it made the local news and led to new laws being passed in KS regulating how HOAs must operate and what kinds of financial records must be kept. Cancer, sure. Endless rules. Left newspapers in your driveway. Letter in the mail so you know about the problem in a week. Grass growing in the driveway cracks. Letter. Grow pineapples in the planter box. Letter. Park weird. Letter. Grass is grown a little bit. Letter. The HOA guy lives across the street. This would drive me up the fricking wall. I hate when people power trip and when there are stupid rules in place. I've seen two types of HOA. The normal one is the one that you never notice. It's $20 bucks a year, and they throw some kind of summer BBQ. They don't get up to much, besides occasional asking somebody to mow their foot tall grass and the like. Then there is the other type of HOA. The type that will write you letters and fines for anything possible. The type that wants nothing less than to drive you nuts. I personally think that they're a government conspiracy to teach Americans how to overthrow totalitarian governments. My HOA overcharged me $10 on a late fee, then overcharged me again, another $10 on the same late fee. No big deal, right? They then tried to foreclose on my house, charging me $2,700 in lawyer's fees to collect their $20. We had permission from the family who owned the land, not part of the HOA, next to us to park our camper and boat. You weren't allowed to have them in your yard or on the street. Can have them in garage. They tried multiple times to fine us, but every time we would point out that that land was not under their jurisdiction and we had permission. They had people walking on our back lawn looking for things that broke the rules. My room was the only one on the bottom floor and faced the backyard. I woke up one morning and there was a strange man right outside my window. We found out who he was and called the HOA. Through liberal use of the phrase "my daughter is a minor" and trespassing, it never happened again. I don't live there anymore, but my aunt still does. The HOA still takes everyone's money, but doesn't any of the stuff they are supposed to, except hand out fines. They used to mow the common areas and make sure sinkholes were safely fenced off. They don't do any of that now. Fear does funny things to a person. Makes you insular. Makes you make anonymous phone calls about landscaping. Makes you pop the slat of your Venetian blind downward when you hear an idling engine because that car may park in front of your house, on your street. What will people think if they drive by and see your neighbor's laundry drying on a line in the backyard? They'll think you're some kind of lowlife immigrant by association. Can't have that now because you are a respectable person. Got to keep things nice. Nice. Everything nice. A nice brick walk free from weeds. A nice lawn mown diagonally instead of parallel. For parallel is so very last year. No work in the garage. That's for storing things, not making things. and certainly not fixing things. As a respectable person, you don't get your hands dirty. Fear the neighbor. Send a letter. Fear for your property value when you know you'll die there. Fear that someone out there is enjoying life instead of trying to keep it lined up, tidy, regimented, compartmentalized, covered in plastic, and only brought out when nice people drop by to remark on how nice everything is. Keeping things nice, not beautiful, for that would cause controversy. People would talk, and that's not nice. Heck isn't fire, or ice, or torture. Heck is a marching band of uptight buttholes with leaf blowers. So tentacle acres. My HOA would send a letter about everything. Grass is 1 stroke 2 inch too high. Letter. Numbers on the house not sufficiently reflective. Letter. UPS left a package on the porch. Letter. Have some friends over and an unapproved number of vehicles either driveway. Letter. The one that drove me the craziest was on trash day. The garbage men would inevitably knock over a can or spill trash that would then blow into my yard. Then I would get someone knocking on my door at stupid o'clock in the morning. These shenanigans led to the Great Mailbox War. I eventually received a letter demanding I repaint my mailbox. After checking the regs, I realized there was no specification as to color. That mother was electric purple the next day. Very next month I got another letter, so I switched it up and painted it Dayglow orange. Next month, another letter. Boom, now it's neon pink. This cycle continued for a year and a half before they gave up. My friend lived in one. You couldn't work on your car in the driveway, so we worked on his car and motorcycles in the garage. Door open so the HOA people. They lived across the street. That sucked. Could see but couldn't say anything. That annoyed them. That and their 2 teenage daughters loved my Harley and always wanted to ride on it. My last neighborhood was just like this, except you also couldn't leave your garage door open if you weren't actively working in there at the time. Both me and my neighbor, who did a lot of woodworking, got written up on the same day. I guess we both happened to be inside when the association president drove by. The dirty little HOA secret is they are created by the developer to keep people from doing anything crazy before they can sell off all the houses. They continue existing just because the developer sells this as a plus and not for its real purpose. I worked for one of these developers in the contracts side, and while I was lucky enough to not have to deal with HOAs, I got to hear a lot of horror stories. Probably the best was a man who would bring his lawyer to HOA meetings. He was rich, retired, and grumpy, and if anyone did anything wrong he brought his legal backing to make sure they were in check. The lawyer never did anything because after all it was a condo HOA in Florida. But I'm sure he didn't mind the paycheck he got for sitting there and listen to people complain about their neighbor's balcony mounted satellite dishes or starting construction work at 7:55 instead of 8. Had to fight to be allowed to make my home wheelchair accessible. Not even anything visible. Just a paved drive to the basement door. That's covered under ADA. They literally cannot enforce that. Fined us for having a non-regulation color curtain in the upstairs window. It was a blue curtain in a tan house. It could only be seen standing at a certain angle from across the street. Stuck will be towed notices on cars parked on the street. On Christmas. Tried to fine us for having our trash can out the day after trash day. We knew for sure we didn't because we were landscaping the backyard the whole week. Went to the meeting and brought up that point and were told, well, we can't always know for sure whose trash can it is. The cans had serial numbers on them. I was house sitting for my parents, and their subdivision had an HOA. I put the trash can out one morning for pickup, then went to work. I had errands to run after work, so I didn't get back to their place until almost midnight. When I got back, I put the empty trash can away. No big deal, right? Well, a few days later my parents got a letter from the HOA. Apparently some busybody didn't like that the empty trash can was left out for several hours after the garbage truck came. These people seriously need to get a life. I actually have a friend who lived in a neighborhood where you weren't allowed to put your trash by the street at all. You either had to store your cans behind your house, provided the garbage men with keys, or leave your garage unlocked on garbage day. As nice as it sounds, it is also incredibly weird at the same time. My parents live in a subdivision where most of the homes have an amazing view of a river that is nearby. The houses in the subdivision are all fairly large, but the biggest home is owned by a very rich farmer in the area. He's also a very high-ranking Mormon in his church, and several members of the subdivision are also Mormons. This guy decided he wanted to build a huge shed on his property where he could keep all of his dirt bikes, motorcycles, ATVs etc. but never asked the HOA for approval to do so, like he was supposed to. So he builds his giant shed, completely blocking his neighbor's view of the river, which is the main reason that a lot of people build homes in this subdivision. When the neighbor went to an HOA to have them file an injunction against Mormon guy, they refused. Their reasoning was that brother, farmer guy, would never do anything like that on purpose. We won't sue him. Buttholes. That's the kind of thing you'd need a township permit for. If he didn't have a construction permit, you can probably get the town to hassle him or tear it down. A hurricane tore through my sister's subdivision a few years back. Her HOA fined her for having tree limbs and other debris in her yard only one day after the hurricane. It was like a $400 fine she had to pay in addition to fixing the damage on her house. They also fined a house in her neighborhood that had its roof torn off for some other insane reason. Go to the news with that crap. Name and shame, especially after a natural disaster. My neighbor had a portable basketball hoop that his boys played with at the end of their driveway. After many orders to remove it from their property were ignored, someone from the HOA came and stole it from their yard. Neighbor was extremely pissed already and that really set him off. He doused an HOA member's lawn, the guy across the street that was making the most noise about the hoop, with acid, killed his lawn. My security cameras caught the whole thing. I accidentally deleted the recording and helped my neighbor cement a new hoop in his driveway. Well, it's not that bad in comparison to what others have gone through, but it was bad enough that we moved to a non-HOA neighborhood after it happened. Basically, our gate to the side yard was pretty cheap and starting to fall apart. We didn't want to replace it with another cheap gate, and so we found a metalworking company that would create a pretty sweet version that would last darn near forever. Since it didn't cost any more and looked notably better, we decided to change the top to be a semicircle instead of flat across. Now, those of you who have had run-ins with HOA saw the word change and immediately knew that that was going to be a serious problem. HOAs don't like change. At all. Indeed, the gate was rejected. The official rejection form just said that it needed to follow one of the approved designs, all with flat tops. But our neighbor was at the meeting where they discussed the change, and apparently the rationale was this gate looks far better than all the others on the block. If we allowed it, then it would lower the property value of the rest of the houses. It was rejected because it looked better than the others, and who looks at gates when it comes to deciding to buy a house or not? The absolute capricious nature of this decision was a final straw for us, and we started the house search to get out of there a few weeks later. I hope you took your awesome gate with you when you left. I hate HOAs because so many of them are terrible. I made sure to buy a house in a neighborhood without one as to not have to put up with their BS. This makes me feel happy for my HOA. Instead of meeting for everything small, they have a website set up and gave us accounts to vote. They'd email us when a new rule was being put to vote. They were also very kind about late fees and even offered to take community service as payment for back fees. After reading a bunch of these comments, I'm so glad I live in a working class neighborhood full of people with real problems. Our roads don't always get plowed as quick as I'd like, but as long as your yard isn't a disgusting jungle, you don't really get any static. My brother and I built an awesome treehouse in a clump of forest next to our house. Some distant neighbor was walking their dog nearby while we were building it and heard the hammering and came to investigate. We were reported to the HOA, but when they came back to inspect it, they couldn't find it. It was built, it was painted camo, and it was a masterpiece of found lumber engineering. No matter, we got a summons to remove it anyway due to it being an eyesore. My dad was afraid of their wrath, with good reason. They were powerful, hateful old geezers, so he made us tear it down. Some tears were shed that summer. If you can find a treehouse in that forest, I'll tear it down. During college I was interning at a golf course in a neighborhood, and one morning I was cutting the greens, and while I was riding from hole to hole I noticed a lot of vandalism. You could follow the joyride of destruction from hole to hole. The first green had a giant tear in it where someone had ran across it with a golf cart. The 150 marker had been run over on the second hole. The no cart path signs were destroyed on the fourth hole. This is also where I found a headlight for a golf cart. More on that later. On the 11th green he had taken the flag stick and shook it back and forth while it was in the cup, causing the hole to become really big and breaking the flag stick. Just a lot of vandalism. Nearly $1,000 in damages. Well, since I had found a golf cart headlight and it didn't match any of the course's carts, we knew it had to belong to someone in the neighborhood who owned a golf cart. We turned over the headlights to neighborhood security and they went around the neighborhood looking for the golf cart. But security comes back and tells us that they ended up finding the golf cart. The garage door was open and they notice a muddy golf cart with a headlight missing. Bingo. Got M. Gonna sue M, right? That's what we've been talking about all morning. Thinking that we're going to bag some 16-year-old kids? Wrong. The owner of the golf cart was hosting a bachelor's party the night of the incident. The driver of the golf cart just so happened to be a police officer in the county where the incident occurred. The HOA decided not to press charges against the officer, and their logic behind it was they don't want to give the police department a reason to not respond to a call in the neighborhood. My superintendent was freaking P. If it was some teenager, they would have sued the kid for everything he was worth. If that same cop caught the teenager, he would have arrested him for it. Pretty freaked up situation. The cop had to give my boss an apology and pay for all damages in order to not have charges pressed. TLDR. Cop vandalizes golf course and HOA decides not to press charges in fear of the police department. When I moved into my condo 4 years ago, my HOA started at $250 a month. When I looked at it, 1 month after purchase, I got a letter from the HOA saying per the vote 6 months back they were redoing the roofs and my HOA was increasing another $140 a month for 10 years. The walkthrough showed no issue with my roof. The condo paperwork mentioned nothing about this. The head of the association is one of my neighbors. When I asked him what this was, he said they were under no obligation to tell me when I was looking at the place just 1 month earlier. That's how the head of the HOA welcomed me to the neighborhood. Hi, pay us more. We don't have to tell you crap. I'm now paying $450 a month for my HOA. No pool, clubhouse, nothing but plowing and any outside repairs. Oh, and 8 months later he asked for my vote to be re-elected. He won. I've lived in 4 HOA developments so far with both good and bad results. First development was fiscally irresponsible. Board was made up of realtors and retired federal employees. 2 of the wives wanted new landscaping at the gates every year, so annually they would hire a firm to rip out the old and replant expensive bushes. They never let anything grow beyond 4 feet, then would decide they hated the plantings and start the process again the next year at the tune of $50,000 annually. The community had 2 ponds. EPA mandated catch basins with pumps that service the entire development's sprinkler system. They sold the pumps off for $2,000, forcing the residents to connect to city water. Would get on residents for parking a plain Ford Ranger in the driveway, saying it was a commercial vehicle since it had commercial plates. Total power trips and dues went up 4x in less than 5 years. The next development was well run and fiscally managed. Overall a great neighborhood. HOA covered everything from snow removal, roof replacement, lawn service, clubhouse, 2 pools, indoor and out, tennis courts, etc., all for $265 a month. Current HOA is again well run and fiscally managed. Advice is do your homework before you move and ask for 5 years of prior budgets. Walk the neighborhood and ask the neighbors what they think of the development, area, board, etc. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.